when you have a clear sense of personal purpose, the things that you do will feel important to you regardless of what anybody around you is doing.
Welcome to A Change in Story, a podcast about the moments that reshape how we see ourselves and the world around us. Today's episode is an interview with Prasant Nukalapati, who rejoins the podcast to talk about what comes after high school and some of the different options one can take. This time, Prasant joins to share his journey of taking a non-traditional path through college and how that influenced not only his time in school, but also his current work and passion for helping young people transition into adulthood. You'll hear how taking a year off school, while not part of the original plan, helped Prashant to shift his perspective away from doing things because it was what other people thought he should be doing and toward doing things that gave him a sense of personal meaning. He also shares how that shift in perspective led him to his profession, which is the first time he felt a deep sense of personal purpose. Not to say that everything was sunshine and rainbows. Prashant's open about some of the challenges along the way, but he also dispels the myth that taking a different road than maybe what is expected or traditional has to be viewed as a second-rate option. Instead, it can be viewed with the same sort of excitement and enthusiasm that many feel as they embark on a traditional 4-year college path. Take a listen to hear more. Welcome, Prashant. Thanks for coming back. I'm excited to talk with you more about the different options and paths that can come after high school, and also talk to you about your own non-traditional path and how that influenced your time in school and even your career. So maybe we can start off there with getting a little bit of background on what that was like for you to take a different path than maybe you had originally expected.
Yeah, I think too. First off, thanks for having me back, Katie. And I think one of the things that is important is maybe for people to understand a little bit of the backstory of what brought me to college. So my parents are immigrants. They came to this country with very little other than, advanced degrees. So that to them created a pathway for them, created a pathway to success. And, there was a lot of, I think, thought, expectation, and pressure to think of college as the natural pathway after high school. And it wasn't so much of whether we were going to college, but that we were going to go to the college that was the most selective, that was the highest on the list, because that was important in our community, right? That there was this kind of pressure that parents, I think, inevitably put on each other when they were having conversations in our communities. And then that pressure trickled down to us as kids. So it really felt like, once again, it wasn't whether or not we were going to college, but how selective that college was and how well known it was. And so that was ever present, I think, in my high school years. And I think back then there weren't a lot of models for alternative pathways to success. I wasn't looking around and seeing a lot of young people in my community. And again, my parents were immigrants. We were part of the Indian immigrant community. I didn't see a lot of people who were just kind of I decided not to go to college and instead I'm doing this. Often those young people were held up as examples of cautionary tales. You don't want your life to turn out like this, right? And so I think for a lot of us, there was a feeling of, if not college, then what? And I think what I realized when I look back on that time, as high school was winding down, as I was applying for colleges, was that I was so burned out. I was so burned out, and I didn't have any sense of why I was doing what I was doing other than it was what I was supposed to be doing. And so I think that's so important because a lot of times young people are also feeling that burnout. So after 12 years of school, people are saying, okay, guess what? Now you get to do more school. And I just think it's a space where a lot of parents and young people are feeling like this is what they should be doing. And I think in the United States, we have very much a college going culture that 4 year college is seen as a mark of success. Whereas maybe a generation ago, that wasn't the case, or 2 generations ago, that wasn't the case, that you could have, vocational jobs or jobs that didn't require a 4 year degree. And somehow that's changed. But what do you do if you are just feeling like you're barely getting by and you're just kind of phoning it in and you just feel like there's this deadline that you're supposed to make and that college graduation is supposed to be kind of like, I don't know, this end to this first part of this journey. And I think a lot of people don't have an answer for that. So I think a lot of these things were happening, when I was growing up, and there was much less conversation around alternatives. I think there are far more like acceptable alternatives now, but back then, I don't think that there were that many other plausible alternatives. So that was, in a way, kind of like the backdrop to what then started the college process for me. So I don't know if that's helpful in terms of a starting point.
Yeah, definitely. I guess out of curiosity, when you were feeling that burnout, did you enjoy school, like high school? Was it sort of a means to an end, if that makes sense?
I sometimes think, I think I sometimes enjoyed high school. I think there were subjects that I enjoyed, but what's interesting that we never really talk about high school is that in high school you are asked to be a generalist. You have to be good at sub all sorts of subjects, including subjects you have no interest in,
Yeah.
right? So maybe like history or English were subjects that I was motivated. Like I had this kind of like, oh, I'm curious about this. I'm interested in this. But like the sciences and math, right? Like those were really hard subjects for me and not subjects I had an interest in. So it sort of felt like half the time I was really engaged, and this other half of the time I was taking these classes that I just wasn't interested in, but I had to take, right? Like when you're in high school, sometimes you're taking all five of your major classes every day. So I think when the college process started, there's an inherent excitement to the college process, right? Like you're suddenly like, oh, this is kind of interesting, and this is a puzzle, and this is a game, and this is like I'm competing with other people. Like you have this external purpose, right? You have this sense that, oh, okay, like I have some clarity now, right? This is all about getting into college, and I loved the process. I was a kid who was very not super introvert, but I was a little bit more introverted, and I suddenly felt like there was this structure to share with people who were supposedly interested in who I was. And introverts, we struggle when we don't have that structure. So, but here was this structure, right? I had essays to explain who I was. I had interviews to talk about things that were interesting and important to me. And I was just like, this is so much fun. When I work with young people now, I think they're stunned that I loved the college process. Like I absolutely loved it. It was just like such a, you get to go to all these places, and every place is different, and like this quad has this and this school has this, and like don't you want to be at a school that has like a film society, like all of these kind of exciting, interesting things. And that's what got me through that process. And ultimately I think I was successful in that process. I wound up at a very highly ranked school, and I feel like that's where the problems started. Because, like I didn't really have any guide for what success looked like once you got into college. And so I often say to young people, getting in is the easy part. It's really staying there and being successful and thriving that will take up most of your energy, and where so many young people struggle.
That's interesting that you really enjoyed the application process and that it gave you a chance to maybe show up in a new way. How did you then end up picking the school that you attended?
I had this very I was interested in history, and saw that as maybe like a degree that would put me on the path to maybe being a lawyer. I mean, I don't know that I had any clear notion of what being a lawyer was, but at least on TV it looked very glamorous, and I thought this could be a possibility. And so then I was like, okay, well, what kind of majors would set me up for that? And so I was interested in history. I decided that political science seemed like a pathway that would sate that interest that I had in history, and it was just kind of intriguing, and it was about the world. And when when I went to college, it was right at the end. The Berlin Wall had come down. It was the end of the Cold War. It was a really exciting time in terms of things happening in the world. And I thought a political science degree would help me make sense of it, but also plug me into all these interesting things. And so I used that as a starting point to, I did my research. I looked at different rankings. I looked in different books where you had like student perspectives about like, this is what you can expect when you get here. And then I had a very niche interest, which was South Asian studies. So my family, once again, is from India. And I was just like, oh my God, you could go to college and study this? I would never be able to do something like that in my high school. It was a very Eurocentric school that I went to, a private high school. And suddenly there was this opportunity to study something that was not available to me. So that was what shaped that search.
Okay. So you knew kind of going in what you wanted to major in, which can be a huge hurdle in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel very fortunate, in knowing that. But, here's the thing. I think that the best gift that we can give young people is helping them develop interests and passions that feel meaningful and authentic to them.
Mhm.
And so I feel like it was luck that I was part of an immigrant community. In some ways, it was probably a chance to kind of like understand my own culture a little bit, understand the history of the culture. It was something I was super fascinated by. I still have family in India. So that was a little bit of luck that I had something like that. And what I see when I work with young people in my practice, which is that so many of them don't have that they have things that they do and that they have things that they spend their time doing, but that they don't have something that they are curious about. And to ask them to have something that they're curious about feels a little unnerving because it means admitting that you don't know something.
Yeah.
And so much of our culture is about asking people to be certain. And I think American culture is very much about asking people to feel certain about something.
So I guess looking at it as this is an opportunity just to learn something new, it doesn't mean that I don't have all the information or I'm lacking in some way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think in my life, when I've had to make decisions, whether it's about college or career, I have felt very fortunate that there has been something that has given me a sense of clarity and maybe purpose. And I think without it, things would have been even more challenging than they wound up being. But for example, like I had this major that I felt very sure about, and then when I left college, I had a clear goal of becoming a high school teacher, and so I had that like clarity. But not everybody does at a young age, and sometimes even as adults, I don't know that we always have clarity around what it is that we're excited about.
Well, it's interesting that you went in thinking you would come out a lawyer potentially or go down a legal path, but you came out wanting to be a teacher.
Yeah.
When was the moment that maybe that shifted for you?
I mean, interestingly, so I went to college, and as I said, it was a very is a very highly regarded school, and that first year was really hard for me. Like I did not realize the level of push that was involved in terms of my parents pushing me across that graduation line when I was in high school. I think when I got to college, I suddenly did not know why I was there. Like I was suddenly a little bit like, what am I doing? Like, how did I get here? Like it was that feeling of kind of like, oh my God, how did I get here? And then not necessarily having the tools to be successful. So I didn't know how to identify when I needed help and ask for that help. I had some skill deficiencies, even though I had gone to a college preparatory school. Like I had trouble writing at the college level. These are just examples of some of the struggles. And so after that first year, my academic performance warranted that the school step in and say, you need to take a break. Like you need to take a year off. And I was just terrified because like nobody I knew in my larger constellation of people had ever had to do something like that. So I was suddenly struggling with this sense of, oh gosh, what do I do now? Everything was supposed to be heading in this direction, and I had arrived, but I had no idea why I was doing what I was doing. So the school, asked me to take a year off, which I did, and I think that was really helpful because it wound up being a year where I paid my own bills, I waited tables, these things that I think developed more resilience and a sense of independence that would later help me feel successful as I navigated whatever I navigated. But in the course of that, it then meant that I was on a little bit of a different track than all of my peers who seemingly were not struggling, who seemingly were like ready to go and like on that path. So I was on this little bit of a separate path. And I think in the process of being on this like different path, it gave me time and perspective and maybe experience in what I would call the real world, because college is not, I would think, what I would call the real world, but like in the real world where my perspective shifted and it shifted away from what I was supposed to be doing according to what other people thought to what I should be doing that gave me a sense of personal meaning. And I'm not gonna lie and say that like when I came back that like college was an easy win. It really wasn't, because I think I was too young personally to be in college. And I'm not sure like all of the pieces, but I think that my own sense of maturity, and I say this not because I was spending all my time at like frat parties or drinking or partying, but just my own sense of maturity and a sense of like how I looked at the world was not developed enough to take advantage of the resources, the very expensive, might I add, resources that were in front of me, right? Because my parents, even back then, tuition was high. And I just was not like, I was not ready. Like, that's all I can say looking back on it. And so I think all of that was a piece of, I think, that shift that I think was super important.
And I'm guessing that shift helped you to hone in on your direction in college and even what you might do afterward.
I think so. There was a point where I think it might have been like junior year, start of junior year, where suddenly like things get real, right? Like even in college, even if I'm struggling, even if I'm like 20 years old at the time, I'm struggling, I'm suddenly like, okay, you got to figure out what's going to happen after this, right? And I looked around and a lot of people my age didn't have an idea. And I am a very practical person. I think my mindset is save yourself because no one's coming to save you. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do for a career? And so I had been volunteering in this like very informal after school program that was like held in the church basement or no structure. It was just basically like a place for young kids in that neighborhood near my school, which was an economically struggling neighborhood. It was a place for them to come after school where their parents could feel like they were safe, right? And I remember volunteering there and just like saying to myself, like, I'm kind of enjoying this. I just didn't think, I think even my parents probably would have said, like, how did you wind up being a teacher? Like knowing me, because this was like, I wouldn't say that my life's desire was to stand up in front of a room of 30 people every day. I was volunteering. I was like, this is kind of interesting. I think I kind of like this. And so I was like, well, it's better to have some direction than no direction. And so then I was like, oh, look, there's this internship at the school. That's a teaching internship at my college, Then I applied for that. And I applied for a program called like not Teach for America. It was called Summer Bridge. It was like a summer teaching internship program. And so once I had that sense of clarity, once I had that sense of like, oh, this thing, like I don't know it fully, but it brings joy into my life. I was like, okay, let's explore it. And then, once I had that, then I could put all my energy in one direction. Because I think without it, my energy was like over here and over here and over here and over here. And that's, I think, the start of like moving towards something rather than wondering what was next.
Which must have been a pretty nice feeling to be moving towards something rather than wondering why you were there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like when I became a teacher after college, and again, like there are like little steps in here that are worth saying. And so as I was leaving college, I literally cold called private schools in the area. And I was like, I'm going to be applying for jobs next year. And I know that places will want to have some experience on my resume. Can I come in and sit in on a class? And I called like 8 schools in Chicago, and 7 of them said no, including the high school that was attached to the university that I went to. But the 8th school was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. We have a new teacher and he has a unit on India. Do you think you might want to come and help with that? And they weren't like giving me any money or anything like that. But so I was like, yes, I could probably teach that. I was suddenly like, again, purpose, purpose, purpose. Oh, this is exciting. And then eventually they were like, oh, well, while you do that, maybe you could run the after school computer lab and we'll give you a little money.
Okay.
So that was the start of that process. But what was utterly surprising to me is as I moved into teaching, how much of myself it called forth, right? It was about like being creative. It was about being connected to people. It was about like sharing information. It was about helping young people. And it just took all of this life force that had not been used for anything, it felt like up till then. And I just remember that feeling of every day feeling like I had left it all on the floor. Like I had showed up and it was like, and I had never had that before. I didn't have that in high school,
Mhm.
right? And I didn't have it in college, but it was only when I got to my profession that suddenly I felt so engaged. And that's really what I want for all young people is I think I want them to feel engaged and seen and valued. And for me, that was what that was. So from going from a person who had no sense of why he was doing what he was doing to be able to find something that every day felt like I know exactly why I'm doing this
Yeah.
was such a gift.
Totally. That's a really cool story. To jump back really quick to when you took a year off of school, what was that experience like of returning? Did you feel behind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it was challenging to some degree in that it felt like my peers were having this one experience and I was having a slightly different experience. But and it's interesting because sometimes I still get alumni news from my college, and I'll see people, and they'll be like so and picture of so and so at like from my dorm even so and so at their friend's wedding or something like that, and it'll be like 12 people that I went to college with that first year, and I just am just kind of like wow, like people are still in touch with each other, you
Yeah.
know and so when you do the same thing as everybody else is doing, there is a little bit of sense of camaraderie around
Mhm.
it, right? But my life, I think and sometimes I feel a little sad that I didn't have as much of that. I still have friends from college, but like maybe I didn't have as much of that. But my life was much richer for having the experience that I had. When I went back to school, I had spent like a year away from college. I was still like waiting tables in the same town my school was at, so on and so forth. But I also met people, that weren't in college or were slightly older. So when I went back to school, it wasn't like I was going back to school as like a typical sophomore. I was going back to school as like a freshman or a sophomore who, lived on the north side of the city and commuted down to the college. Very different experience. But, there was so much like culture and life and maybe a little bit more unpredictability. And I didn't I think I thrived in that a little bit. I think I felt in college like someone just slightly out of sync with folks, like a little bit out of place. And I say this because I knew people in college who never left campus, who never took the train to the north side of the city. and who never saw these neighborhoods. And I did, like, that was a part of my life. So sometimes it's hard to have conversations with people who are not sharing what you are doing.
Yeah. Do you think that you found a way to sort of make college work for you then?
I think I did. First off, I had to figure out some things. Like, I had to figure out some really basic skills like writing and writing at that level, which I think has served me well in life. So I do feel like I gave myself over to that process a little bit in college. And I took classes that were interesting. But I think at that point there was still a feeling because of my age of just like, just get through this.
Yeah.
Just be done with this. You even like at that point, junior, senior year, I even had a sense of what I was going to be doing afterwards. And it almost felt like college was holding me back. I was just like, look, I know I want to be in education. I want to be a teacher. So, oh gosh, I still have to take rocks for jocks or physics, or those were hard classes to get through and have nothing to do with my life afterwards. So, I made some practical calculations is probably the best way to say, like, I made college work for me, because getting a degree from the school that I got my degree from did open doors. And I think that was probably the most valuable thing.
Do you see maybe today that there are more alternatives for young people if college maybe isn't, not right now, but you're not yet, but a little later down the line?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot more possibilities, and I think there's more acceptance of it because the cost of college education has gone so high that I think parents are a little bit more open to not flushing money down the toilet,
Yeah.
proverbial toilet, right? If their kid is not ready, or if their kid just maybe doesn't know, or maybe their kid's disposition is different. When I was a kid, maybe there is a gap year idea, but it wasn't very common. But there are, formal gap year programs. There are informal gap year programs, right? A young person can sign up for a fully inclusive program that includes a place to live, an internship, food, all of these things. Or they can just use a year and maybe work and then develop some of those skills around independence and self advocacy that would help them. And when we talk about college, college is not just one thing, right? I think often when we talk about college, we mean 4-year college, and we mean 4-year college where you go away to school. So even I think there's more conversation around 4-year college, but maybe you stay at home because you need that support, or 2-year college as a way to like figure out something you're interested in, or get rid of those requirements that you have to do at any school anyway. And in many cases, those classes at a community college are free. Like in San Francisco, where I live, City College is free. It's an amazing opportunity to try things without the pressure of, oh my God, if I don't like this, then that's $5,000 of tuition. I think that there are apprentice programs, there are career pathway programs, and I think also there are programs that maybe we haven't talked about in a while, such as, like ROTC,
Yeah.
or like military service, or, hands-on training programs. So there are a lot of possibilities. People don't know about them because if you're a parent, like, your neighbors are not talking about them. Your neighbors are talking about college. If you're a kid, none of your friends are being like, oh, I'm interested in like a baking program, at this community college. So I think it's really important that, or I hope that families can find places to get that support, because when you're doing something different, sometimes it's a little lonely. I'm not going to lie. It can feel a little lonely, a little isolating. And sometimes you need a cheerleader to be like, yeah, this is different, but here are the benefits. And here are going to be some of those drawbacks. But here is a way where you don't get left behind.
Do you feel like the loneliness factor is sort of a big hindrance from people embarking on maybe an alternative path sometimes, or the idea that it could be lonely?
I think it's maybe less the idea of loneliness, although I think that's in the background, and more a sense of being left behind.
Yeah.
Like, all your friends are doing this, but here I am doing this. But I guess I'm here to say that here I am doing this doesn't have to be like the booby prize. It doesn't have to be kind of like, oh, because that makes it sound like, oh, I couldn't really hack college, so I have to come up with something sad. And, like, whatever I do is going to be sad. It doesn't have to be. Like, the, I want young people to feel like there are possibilities of that you can be doing that are exciting. So you don't feel left. So the focus isn't on being left behind, but having a different experience. I think what happens sometimes is for folks who don't go to college, it can feel a little bit like, oh, well, I didn't go to college. I guess I'm living this sad life, you know. And it doesn't have to be. It really doesn't have to be like that. There are ways that it won't be. And it will require a little bit of putting on earplugs to sometimes the voice that's in your own head. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like be, like that sense of like everybody's doing this, I'm doing this. Or it could be like everybody's doing this, but I'm doing this. Also acknowledging, sometimes when we have different experiences, we have different experiences, and what's most important is that those experiences feel meaningful to us, not like the audience of people that we have to explain that to.
Which I think is super helpful. And maybe when you're younger and you've been following the same trajectory as everyone else for so long, to
Yes.
veer off and do something different does take a certain amount of kind of courage and self
Yeah.
confidence in a way to be able to not feel victim to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the people that find this alternative pathway most successful are the kids who are a little eclectic and a little different and a little, who show up at school dressed differently than their peers, or who show up in class and have different perspectives and things to say. It's harder for them. I'm sorry, it's easier for them. It's harder for the kid who is a little bit, they don't want to stick their head out, like they don't really want to be. And I think for a lot of high school kids, they don't want to be noticed. If you look at the way high school kids dress, for example, it's very much like, don't look at me, like I'm just here, part of the group. It's harder for those kids. It can be done, but it's harder for those kids. But the kids who are already primed to think that there's different ways of looking at things, there's different ways of dressing, there's different ways of eating, there's different ways of being in the world and spending your time. It's just an extension of something they already do.
And how, in your mind, or even in your experience, might that sort of adaptability benefit someone as they continue on in life?
Yeah, it's like when you take a different path, sometimes it requires extra work. But oftentimes I find that the young people who take those different paths live more, not, I don't want to say successful, but more fulfilled, like emotionally fulfilled lives. But I think, again, when it comes to like thinking about a career, it the most important thing to my mind is having, once again, clarity around your purpose, around what animates you. And so whether it's somebody who has taken like a traditional path through 4-year college and is thinking about a career, or someone who is just kind of like, that doesn't work for me, has gone this alternative route. When you start thinking about your career, the most important thing is to have that pause, have that moment to reflect, and think about like what is truly meaningful to you, and not just meaningful to you, because I think it can be easy to say to a young person, just follow your passion. You know what? Like sometimes that leads you nowhere. I'm not gonna lie. Like but you have to follow your passion with some sense of understanding what you're good at, what you want to be good at, what you want to contribute to the world, what you're curious about, what your values are. And all of these things take work. And I guess for the young person who has never had to like veer off that path and just follows the herd, oftentimes they have not done this work. They have not done the work of reflection because they don't have to, because they're successful. But it's the kid who's had a few bumps in the road who is much more likely to have had someone say, okay, well, if not this, then what else? And even if they don't know right away, at least they're on that path towards self-discovery, which, let's face it, does not end in our youth. Like it's something I say to young people, like the biggest task that you will have in your life is not your career or like family, but being something meaningful to yourself. And I think that's really the most important thing. And earlier that we can help them build some of those skills, the better they will be in handling any pivots or missteps or just like moments of anxiety or uncertainty.
Yeah. And maybe too, also this idea you mentioned passion, and sometimes you can be passionate about something and not really like it. But then if the more
Yes.
you know yourself too, then you can maybe acknowledge, oh, I don't really like it. It's okay. And I can do something else or try something else or take some of
Yeah.
this and move on.
Well, also I think it's about like figuring out like what the perfect equation is for oneself. Because sometimes maybe you have a job that isn't that interesting, but it allows you to do these things that are really interesting.
Mhm.
And sometimes the thing you're most passionate about isn't what you should spend 40 hours a week doing.
Mhm.
Maybe that thing is the thing that you keep for yourself,
Yeah.
right? So it's there's no like easy solution or easy equation to all of this other than clarify your personal purpose and then figure out the stops along the way in your personal journey that is going to be unique and different than any other person's personal journey.
And that can be a good thing and a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think a lot of times with young people we teach them like specific things and like facts, but like what I wish we taught young people was more about ways of being in the world. Like how do you develop curiosity if it's not something that comes naturally to you? Like how do you want people to think of you when your name comes up in their conversation? How do you make people feel? How do you want to make people feel? How do you maybe make space for something that is important to someone else, even if that thing is not important to you?
Fair question.
Right? Because I think all of these things are the things that contribute to young people feeling hopeful and positive about the world and connected, right? Because that last thing I said is really about like empathy and like that is how you build bonds with people is not taking the thing that's most important to you and just seeing who else is out there that shares that thing, but finding people who may be different from you and having space for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of on that note, and given your experience working with young people, I know people don't always like giving advice, but do you have any advice, or what would you hope to instill in young people as they navigate this part of life post high school and moving into adulthood?
I think the advice is like the key advice is always the same. Don't start with a series of tasks that you need to complete or hoops, which essentially wind up being hoops that you need to jump through. Start by taking some time to reflect either on your own or with the help of somebody around your personal purpose and use that as the guide for whatever it is that you decide to do. Don't do things that other people are doing just because you think you're supposed to be doing those things. There may be like a few things in your life where that is the case, but when you have a clear sense of personal purpose, the things that you do will feel important to you regardless of what anybody around you is doing. So that's my advice is like sometimes put a pause on the actions and spend a little time with the guided reflection. And then those actions will feel the solutions or like the pathways will come so much more naturally. It will just flow because it's grounded in something that is so core to you as a young person. And again, because I believe that no one is here to save us, you have to save ourselves. It's up to you as a young person to do that. Like maybe your parents might, point you in that, or maybe a teacher might, but ultimately you are accountable to yourself and your joy and your sense of hope comes from you. So this is sometimes really hard work, and sometimes it's work that a young person has been like, "Oh my God, I've never thought about those things." Like, thank you for giving me some structure to think about these really important things. So I guess it's like know that being something for yourself is the hardest work you'll ever do, and that it also is the most rewarding,
Yeah.
because I think where you go while you do that work will make much more sense to you and will feel much more an extension of who you are and will feel enlivening and hopeful and full of possibilities. And I think in this moment of such uncertainty in the world, that's the advice I would give, that there is reason to be hopeful. There is reason to lean into possibility, but that work starts with you and that the work can be so wonderful.
How would you describe personal purpose? Like, what is your sort of definition or explanation of that?
Yeah, I think personal purpose is a little bit of an intersection of different aspects of life, and I'll talk about a few of them. So think of personal purpose as like the meeting of these circles, that these like Venn diagrams are sort of overlapping in these little corners, and personal purpose is the overlapping of what you're passionate about with what you want to contribute to the world, what you're good at, with your values, as well as what you're curious about. And like somewhere in there, right in the middle of all of that, is your personal purpose. And it might be that a person's personal purpose is more grounded in what they're passionate about. But it also might be for another person, their personal purpose might be grounded in what they're good at, you know, or what they're curious about. But I really think it's like, just imagine all of these circles, like a spirograph, and like somewhere in the middle, they all kind of converge and overlap. And this little sliver is what I think where you start with some clarity around your personal purpose.
Gotcha. And then everything can kind of flow from there, the actions, the decisions, the way forward.
Yeah, because I work with a lot of young people in that college space or in the career space, it can feel like, oh, great, personal purpose. Now I know what to do in college, or now I know what to do in my career. But personal purpose also should inform like the people you have in your life. Like if you have clarity around what's important to you, and again, that little pinpoint for all these areas, then you have clarity around the type of person you want in your life, whether that be a friend or a classmate. You can go into a class and be like, there are no people in this class that like meet this. I mean, that sounds kind of snappy, but like, you get a sense, right? Like you can get a sense of kind of like, oh, maybe this isn't the class where I'm going to find people who are connected to my personal purpose. But also it should shape your like romantic relationships, your family relationships. So for me, for example, I'll give an example. My personal purpose, I think I have two. My first personal purpose is helping young people launch and be excited about their future. So now I have this personal purpose in mind. My other personal purpose is around building community through arts. So, but let's take the piece around helping young people launch. I know this. Like, if you like poked me at 4 o'clock in the morning, I would say this is my personal purpose. So every day now I have some clarity, and so like, well, this is my personal purpose. And then I interact with people and I'm suddenly like, oh my gosh, you're really connected to this idea of personal purpose. Or you really are not. Like your focus is on material things or whatever it is, whatever. I'm kind of like, oh, like this is someone I want to invite to my life. This is energy I want to invite to my life. And this is a part of a community that I want to grow. So it's personal purpose is not just to like a means to an end, but I think a way of shaping your life in all aspects of it. Even how do you spend your free time? If my personal purpose is like X, then maybe there's a volunteer opportunity that gives me space to exercise that personal purpose. Or maybe this opportunity really does not. And so I make a decision to not engage in that.
Yeah.
So,
Almost like a filter, kind of helping you just.
yeah, a lens, a filter, like a worldview.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I also like to ask people if there's anything else that kind of popped into your mind as we've been talking that you want to add, or anything that I haven't asked that you think is important to share.
I think it's also good advice is to try things and to try them when you're young. And even like the work of personal purpose, the younger you can do it, the better. Because as you get older, there are these things like mortgages and like family obligations and your job and that limit the ways you can pivot. But when you're young, you have less of that. So engage in it. Don't wait for the existential crisis to come to you where suddenly you're like, oh my God, how did I get here? What do I do now? But just like proactively engage in being in the world, in trying new things, in exploring, developing passions, because it does get harder. It gets harder to be able to do those things in a sustainable way, and then you get boxed in. So then maybe we lose sight of personal purpose because we have these like practical things that we have to pay attention to, like paying rent, right? Like let's get real, like just these obligations, or like taking certain jobs so you can pay off your student loans. And I mean, here's the thing, like I don't want to be Pollyannish. Sometimes we have to make decisions that are not based on anything other than our survival. Sometimes we have to make these decisions, and not all of us all the time have this flexibility in thinking about whatever it is we want to think about, and purpose and all of these things, or it may not feel that way, which is why I think when we're younger, it is so important. But it is, I think, important to acknowledge that there are practical considerations. But I guess my point is that sometimes the worry that we have is not the worry that we have. It's like a worry that society has, or like our friends have. We look around, and all of our friends are like, oh, I need to get my life together by 30. So understand your situation and detach it from like the group worry or the group anxiety or the group think. And so like if you need to get a job like right after college, then there's nothing that changes that. But just know that these kind of worries about what you should do, it's all up for grabs now.
Yeah. Yeah.
We live in a very different world where things are changing very rapidly. And I think a lot of that is not like, hold it as a worry, but know that it is not the biggest worry. Be something for yourself first. That again, I think is the core idea. Be something for yourself first. Focus on that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on again and for being willing to talk a little bit more about your own personal journey and how that, led you to where you are now. And I appreciate it. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the conversation. And, I hope that, either young people or their parents hearing this conversation leave it feeling hopeful and full of possibility. And, I encourage them, if they want to reach out, if they're welcome to do that. And maybe we can put that contact information somewhere in the notes. But yeah, every day is full of possibility. And that's something that I hope that young people can feel.
you can check out more about Prashant and his work helping young people launch into adulthood and feel excited about their future at his website, which is linked in the episode description. Thanks for listening, and take care.